a common misconception due to the proliferation of people like Google and Bing and everybody walking around with an iPhone, that you just put in a keyword or a few keywords and you get everything that you need for the given time period, right? So there are applications that are really good with approaching search in this way, but unstructured data search doesn't work this way. Some aspects of it do, most of it does not, and we'll talk about why that is. All right. The key challenge with unstructured data is exactly that. It's unstructured, and it's a result of business. Business is driven by the people who operate within that business. All right? Data in an enterprise consists of all different types of things. It's file shares, it's email servers, it's PCs, it's laptops. Today it's smartphones. You also have information that's managed and stored by outside consultants. Right? So how do you go about keeping all this in mind while making sure that you're answering the question and achieving the goal that we laid out? Okay. So nothing is necessarily stored in a way that's searchable and easily discovered. And that data is only continuing to grow. Right? And there are many studies out there, but there are figures that say anywhere from 70 to 85% of data in a corporate entity is unstructured. Just sitting somewhere because someone created a document and knows what it's about, called it ed.docx, and it's just sitting there on a file share. Nobody knows what that document's about except me. Maybe I called it something meaningful. Maybe I had it. Maybe I was in a rush and I just put it in a temporary folder that said I need to catch my train. So the first step in going after this unstructured data is the identification part of that EDRM reference model. Okay? And what we mean by identification is not only just identifying the data itself, but where it might be stored, who are the players involved. And this is a process. Most commonly, the first step that's undertaken is just an interview with the potential custodians of interest, right? And what the graphic on the left really talks about is really what I prefer is communicated with the photo on the right. Here we have this little girl pouring objects from this container at the bottom that she's standing on into this mechanism that's attempting to filter them out in some way. Maybe it's doing a good job, maybe it's not, but at least it's a process, right? And she seems to be having a good time. And on the bottom left, there's apparently a doll waiting to play with something that comes out of the other side, right? But how do we know that this little girl is even standing on the right box, right? Who directed her to that box? Apparently someone went through a great deal of time and effort to put this mechanism together, but how do we qualify that mechanism? Maybe there should be 4 tubes, not 3 tubes. Maybe there should only be 1. Okay. So I'd like to just use that picture to kind of describe the identification process. So items are going to go on the top. What comes out the other side needs to be meaningful, and we need to decide what that mechanism is. Okay. Again, identification is really an iterative part of this process. Identification can happen after the collection phase as well, perhaps even during the processing as we start to get a little bit more information about what it is that we've collected and initially identified. So we try to cast our net in as wide a way as we possibly can, identify the potential data sources, and use techniques and software and analysis to further whittle it down to have yet another layer of identification, and again kind of cycle back on ourselves as far as the process goes. As I mentioned before, a big part of the identification process is just figuring out who are the players, right? If we're reporters, we're looking for the who, what, when, where, why. So we approach this in a very similar way. Who are the people in play? Is it a particular business group or a location? And this is really important because in business, people come and go in organizations all the time. Maybe someone's been there throughout the entire period of interest in the complaint. Maybe someone's been there for only a year. Maybe someone's been there for a year in between, right? So it's important to know all these things, and we've got to try to identify someone in the organization who has that legacy knowledge to tell us, today this business unit is 10 people. It started as 2, but there were as many as 15 different people involved in this business unit in the 3 years that we're talking about. Okay, so it's important to try to figure that out, and then once we try to figure that out, we can then begin to understand how these people were working, what applications were they using, what locations were they housed out of, and what resources did they have access to during that period of time. So, who are the key players, custodians of interest? Now, once we figure out who the key custodians are, we need to figure out a strategy for getting at the data. Do we want to utilize an indexing approach, or do we want to image a lot of PCs, perhaps image an entire an array in a server room, or do we want to perhaps do some hybrid approach? Okay? And this is often driven by the deadline of the situation, the costs, or the nature of the issue. Maybe it's something that the civil litigation is only worth $100,000, and the client doesn't necessarily want to spend $75 finding the data. Okay, so that's a critical issue also. Right. So, and there are benefits and drawbacks to each. Indexing gets you really a quick snapshot of what's out there, and you can start searching with very basic keywords very quickly. Whereas an imaging effort gives you the ability to have a long-term preservation, to be able to say at this particular day and time, as documented by this chain of custody, this data lived in this environment in this way. Okay? So we very often take a hybrid approach. We image and we index. We tend to index after we image. There are some instances where people are preparing for a civil litigation, or they know that there's an investigation coming, that maybe the first thing they do is index just to get a feel for what's out there and to get a handle on what the collection effort and identification effort might need. Okay? And we do have to be careful with indexing methods. Indexing methods are not necessarily forensic methods. Anything that tends to leave a trace of what it is that we've done, we don't like to do, right? That's kind of the first tenet of forensics. Leave no trace of what's happening, right? Capture the data, but don't let anybody know that you've been there, and be able to speak to how it's done and be able to repeat it if you need to. Indexing may alter metadata, okay? So that's something to keep in mind. But there are also other business practices that alter metadata. A backup can alter metadata. The last access date and time is altered just with a backup sometimes, right? So depending on what's happening, depending on the intensity of the issue or the sensitivity, you may be able to approach it with an indexing approach if last access times and dates are not that critical. Okay? Hopefully you can work on a copy of the data that you forensically imaged and not worry about that. Okay? But these are really key points. Now, there are many different tools. I could have had here 8 to 10 slides of different applications that are involved in any one of these processes. And I include groups, I know they're here today. Feel free to speak to them about the details of how their application approaches the unstructured data search question and the analysis question. But many of you, I'm sure, are familiar with NCASE and MTK. They're kind of the staples of the forensic acquisition endeavor. And these are some others that we use on a day-to-day basis. DT Search is a very popular indexing application. Very fast. It allows you to do some pretty sophisticated searches, but in a very, very simple way. And again, very, very quickly. But be aware that DT Search is not a forensic application. Okay. There's some folks, some friends of ours you know very well, Pinpoint Labs. They're developing some interesting technology. They have some remote forensic collection kits that you can send out to different places across the country, across the world. You can pre-configure to gather data and even search in a very basic way in that data, or filter it as it's coming into the forensic image. Wave software is one that is commonly used to search and get a handle on some of the unstructured data issues we face. And Sherpa is one that we commonly use as we get more and more involved in having to connect to Microsoft Exchange databases, the EEB files, not only the PST and OST, but actually going to the Exchange server itself and connecting to the EEB and being able to pull out mail as a result of that process. Okay? So again, we use anything and everything that's meaningful to us, and many of these applications can help you in your day-to-day, depending on the nature of the issue. In addition to just the software and the imaging versus indexing, it's important to note that there's a big difference between searching metadata and searching content. And there are key differences in this. Searching for a folder or a particular file name is very different from searching for the content of a document, or the intended content or the concept of a document, or a word or phrase within a particular document. And the different applications approach this different ways as well. So it's important to become familiar with the application that you're working with, make sure the issue at hand is matched well with the technology that you're using to go after the particular data, and understand the difference of searching between metadata and just folders and files. Okay, big difference.